Dragon Age: The Veilguard marks the long-awaited return of the series after 10 years, and this new entry is a significant departure from the previous games, offering fresh gameplay mechanics, a cartoonish and stylized art direction, and of course a touch of some unnecessary modern politics. However, the game's underlying technology remains the same as it continues to run on EA's in-house Frostbite engine, with full support for modern rendering features like ray tracing, various image reconstruction techniques, and probably the best looking hair rendering I have seen in recent games. When it comes to the PC port, BioWare has done an outstanding job. This is perhaps the most polished PC release I have tested this year, with stable performance, no noticeable traversal or shader compilation stutters, and a robust, well-designed graphics menu that offers a wide range of settings and options. So in this video we're going to explore these settings and options, analyzing their impact on performance and visuals to help you strike the best balance between smooth gameplay and high visual fidelity. So without further ado, let's get going. Let's start with image quality and the upscaling options. And here, when setting DLSS, FSR3 and XeSS at 1440p in quality mode and comparing them side by side, we can see distinct differences. FSR when in motion appears soft and struggles to retain fine details. XeSS looks way better in this regard, but it has a bit more shimmering compared to DLSS. And performance-wise on the 3060 Ti, DLSS has a slight advantage with XeSS and FSR3 performing pretty much similarly. At native resolution, the game offers the option to turn off anti-aliasing completely in addition to 2 quality levels for DLAA. And here is a comparison of how the game looks and performs with anti-aliasing turned off alongside DLAA set to low and high. And finally, here is a comparison of DLAA high against DLSS, XeSS and FSR3 and their anti-aliasing modes. The game also includes frame generation, but unfortunately only DLSS frame gen is supported here, requiring an RTX 40 series GPU. However, we can bypass this limitation by using mods like Nucom's frame gen mod, specifically the universal DLL file. And I'll leave the links to these mods at the pinned comment and the description down below. And before trying these mods, make sure to enable hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. Just right click on the desktop and go to display settings, graphics, change default graphics settings and enable hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. And here Nucom's mod works as intended on the 3060 Ti, with no noticeable visual or performance issues, apart from the typical UI and other 2D elements that update at a low rate as you can see here. The official DLSS frame gen also works as expected and generally handles the UI elements more seamlessly, but keep in mind that frame generation is not a free performance boost, as it comes at the cost of more VRAM usage and also some input latency, which can be noticeable if you are sensitive to input lag. Now I want to go over 3 settings that don't seem to impact visuals or performance. The first is texture filtering. As shown here, regardless of the option selected, the game appears to default to the highest quality texture filtering. The second setting is sky quality, and I've tested this one across various scenes and areas, but noticed no changes in visuals or performance. And lastly, we have visual effect quality. And examining various effects like fire, as you can see here, or particles generated by special attacks shows no noticeable impact on visuals or performance. And with that out of the way, let's move on to texture quality. And here with the 8GB 3060 Ti, each option gradually improves the resolution of textures applied to some surfaces, with slightly increased RAM usage and noticeable performance drops starting from high. Ultra texture quality in particular shows significantly higher allocated and used VRAM. And the latest update adds an even higher quality option for textures called Fade Touched. And obviously it's not meant for 8GB GPUs, as you can see here. It doesn't bring any improvement to textures quality, and it increases the VRAM usage even more. And during normal gameplay, I noticed that with high texture quality, at least in this area, the VRAM usage approached the 8GB limit with quality DLSS at 1440p. So generally for 8GB GPUs, I recommend sticking with medium textures to avoid any potential stuttering or performance drop. Moving on to lighting quality, this setting primarily affects the resolution and quality of the game's shadow maps, with higher options providing more detailed and accurate shadows, and add more shadows with higher quality at greater distances, as you can see here. Performance-wise, going from low to medium costs around 3%, to high 8%, and to ultra 9%. So for this one I recommend medium, and if you have more performance to spare, use high. Next we have Contact Shadow. Enabling this option applies screen space shadows to small objects and environmental details, adding more depth to the scene, as you can see here. In terms of performance, Contact Shadows have little to no significant impact, so I recommend keeping this option enabled. For Ambient Occlusion, this game relies on HBAO, and as you can see here, Ambient Occlusion is crucial for the visual presentation, and disabling it significantly hurts the overall look of the game. And here the HBAO full option improves the coverage and intensity of Ambient Occlusion, and thankfully in this game HBAO is so cheap in terms of performance. Therefore I recommend HBAO full. Moving on to another screen space effect, screen space reflections. And here in this scene, enabling SSR costs up to 6%. But despite this cost, I recommend leaving SSR enabled, because disabling it can negatively impact the visual presentation. Next we have Volumetric Lighting. This one should adjust the resolution and quality of volumetric effects like fog, light shafts, clouds, etc. However, after testing this setting across multiple scenes, I couldn't notice any visual or performance impact when moving from low to ultra. But there are certain areas like this one where switching between the options results in a significant performance hit with no noticeable visual difference. Therefore, I recommend keeping Volumetric Lighting at low. Let's move on to ray tracing. Dragon Age the Veilguard features two ray tracing effects, ray traced reflections and ray traced ambient occlusion. And there are two options to control these RT effects, selective, which limits ray tracing to specific locations, and the on option, which applies ray tracing globally and everywhere. And RT reflections can add a lot to the game's visuals and get rid of SSR artifacts. But that comes at a high performance cost, around 14% in a scene like here, or 22% in a steel like this one with more reflections. Ray Trace Ambient Occlusion, on the other hand, doesn't offer a noticeable improvement over HBAO full. It just looks different, and you likely won't notice it during normal gameplay. And this is reflected on the performance side, as RTAO costs only around 3% in this area. There is also an Ultra Ray Tracing option, which further improves the quality of ray tracing. First, it improves the accuracy and the range of ray trace reflections. Notice here how when this option is disabled, there is a noticeable gap in the reflection, but with Ultra Ray Tracing, the entire scene is reflected. This option can also significantly improve the resolution of RT reflections, and we can see this here where the reflection looks cleaner with Ultra Ray Tracing. And performance-wise, enabling Ultra Ray Tracing has a significant cost, around 17%. So overall, for my optimized settings, I don't recommend enabling ray tracing. But if you have enough performance and VRAM to spare, it's better to prioritize RT reflections over RTAO, as they provide a more substantial visual enhancement. Next, we have level of detail. This setting adjusts the LOD and geometry complexity of various objects in the game, which affects LOD pop-in. And here we can see that starting from high, the pop-in becomes less noticeable. Additionally, this setting adjusts the geometry quality used to cast shadows. And as you can see here, lower options produce less detail and less complex shadows. And as a result, the low option in particular exhibits noticeable shadow pop-in. And similar to text texture quality, the setting received a new Fade Touched option, though this new option does not significantly reduce LOD pop-in compared to Ultra. Performance-wise in this scene, there is a minimal impact of around 2% when going from low to Fade Touched, but here in the shadow scene, the impact is more significant when going to Ultra and Fade Touched. Therefore, I recommend keeping level of detail at high. Moving on to Strand Hair. As I mentioned during the intro, this game probably has the best looking hair rendering I have seen since Nvidia's Hairworks, and it's all thanks to this Strand Hair feature, which dramatically enhances hair rendering by using real strand-based geometry, allowing the hair to have more accurate shading and realistic interactions with the game's lighting, making it softer, more natural and dynamic in various lighting conditions. And in terms of performance, Strand Hair can cost up to 15% during cutscenes, though its impact during normal gameplay is lower, around 8 to 10%. So because of the massive visual improvement, I highly recommend keeping Strand Hair enabled. Next we have terrain quality. The setting adjusts the amount of tessellation applied to the terrain, which affects the ground bumpiness as you can see here, and it has a minimal performance cost of around 3% when going from low to ultra, so leave this one at ultra. Terrain decoration quality. This one controls the density and variety of scattered objects like grass, shrubs, rocks, and other ground details. And performance-wise, going from low to medium costs around 2%, to high 7%, and to ultra 15%. So for this one I recommend medium. Let's move on to depth of field and post-processing. During cinematics, enabling depth of field while increasing the post-processing quality to ultra can reduce performance by about 12%. During regular gameplay, depth of field is less noticeable, but it still impacts performance. For example, here with depth of field enabled, I am getting around 55 FPS. And if I disable it, the performance jumps to 62 FPS, which is a 12% improvement. Post-processing setting, as I showed, controls the quality of depth of field alongside other post-processing effects. Interestingly, this setting also has an impact on the ripples and simulation effects on water surfaces, as you can see here, and it costs around 3% when going from low to ultra, so I recommend leaving this one at least on high. Lastly, let's take a look at field of view. In this game, adjusting the FOV can significantly affect performance. Here, going from 60 to 100 costs around 12%, to 130 19%, and to 160 20%. So keep this in mind before increasing the FOV. So given everything we've discussed so far, here are my recommended settings for Dragon Age the Veilguard. Now let's compare the performance of optimized settings against Ultra preset at 1440p using quality DLSS with medium textures and no ray tracing or frame generation on both sides. Here in the forest, we can see that optimized settings on average perform around 30% better than Ultra preset. And here in this island, we can see on average a performance improvement of around 20% when going from Ultra preset to optimized settings. And finally, just to show you a different scenario where instead of using upscaling, I'll use dynamic resolution scaling with XeSS AA because DLAA does not work with DRS. Here in this town, optimized settings offer about 10% performance increase over Ultra, though it's still not enough to hit 60 FPS. However, enabling dynamic resolution scaling helps achieve that 60 FPS target with minimal hit to image quality. And with that, we arrive at the end. Thank you so much for watching and for your time. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.